Today, I'm excited to welcome Miss Margaret Gordon to Pamela Price Unfiltered. Miss Margaret Gordon is a powerhouse in the fight for environmental justice and a true champion for community health. She is the co founder of the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, where she's led decades of work pushing back against environmental racism and fighting for clean air and equitable development in communities that for too long have been ignored. We honored Miss Margaret this past week as one of the mothers of the movement, and she displayed her dedication to young people, and it really showed how wonderful the work is and the legacy that she is leaving in our community. Ms. Margaret's activism has helped shape local and national policy initiatives around public health and environmental equity. Her work is rooted in lived experience, fueled by deep community ties, and driven by a relentless belief that everyone deserves to breathe clean air and live in a safe, healthy neighborhood. She's not just an advocate, she's a beacon of grassroots leadership, resilience, and real change. Miss Margaret, welcome to Pamela Price Unfiltered.
Thank you, Pamela, for having me. I really do appreciate that for you to want to hear my story, my how I have been part of exploring this pathway into this science, the technology, the engineering, and community engagement, and being part of community to learn to lead their own plans and designs of pollution, not only here in the United States, but I was surprised that one of the students that I mentored, she said she learned about me in India. That
That's
was like, that was like the icing on the cake.
yes, ma'am.
She told me, she said, I learned about you, the work that you was doing in India. So, I mean, so I feel that it has been this life living work for many decades and commitment and dedication to learning every level of the process. Because those who want to dismiss us don't think we have the capacity to learn every level of the process, and there being complexities of how they get to run our lives. And this is one of the cornerstones of my work, is showing young people that you do not have to live under these circumstances anymore.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Well, that's just incredible. And given the climate emergency that we face, it is certainly a task worth doing, not only to mentor the young people as you have, but again, yes, those who are most impacted and closest to the problem should be the ones we're talking to about the solutions. And so I know that you embody that in the work that you have done. So tell my audience what first motivated you to become involved in environmental justice and holding polluters and government officials accountable for the air that we breathe.
Young mother, with two kids, in my 20s, going back to college. I didn't come out of I didn't come out of high school going to college. And when I got on welfare, I had a social worker who was he was prioritizing that women who had certain capacity that he was going to put in jobs, training programs, or going to college. And I was one of those. He supported me in getting a tutor, got me prepared to be going to college. Got my child care together, buy my books, my transportation. And that's how I was able to go to college with two kids. I had
That's
two children.
excellent.
That's how I went to college in San Francisco City and San Francisco State. And then later on to Merritt College, to UC Extension, and then doing the work that I've been doing in West Oakland. But I would never thought I was going to go to college without that kind of support.
Mm-hmm. So, how did you get started being an activist in West Oakland and dealing with the issues that impact our community there?
Okay, it was very personal. I have asthma. I got my two sons at that time had various forms of allergies and asthma, and it just seemed to be, it was constantly being at the doctors or the emergency hospital, at Children's Hospital, Highland. I was out the base. It was just a consistent revolving door for me to deal with them. And then simultaneously there was these community meetings about the impacts of particular matter and relationship to public health in the neighborhood. And I started going to those meetings. For some reason, I got to start going to those meetings because I had a friend named Gloria Taylor. He said, well, you need to go to these meetings because you got asthma and stuff. Your kids are always sick. You need to go. So I start going to these meetings on various level understanding about public health and asthma. And the next thing I know, I am being asked to be on this committee around the issues of exploring the root causes of these problems, not in West Oakland, in West Oakland. And I also had applied for a position to be around violence prevention for at the West Oakland Health Center, and I would go visit the school nurse, and I would go into at Prescott School, and the school nurse would have these shoe boxes and baskets with inhalers, asthma inhalers with kids' names on it, and I would just kept asking the question, why are all these kids sick? And then it came how I got to interconnectedness through the public health education about particulars and diesel and the trucks, the trains, the ships that had been established in West Oakland as the Port of Oakland. And that education, that orientation sparked something in me that how do I be more supportive of people being learning of these conditions because of what is being placed in our neighborhood.
Right. Yes.
And then the next thing I know, right after, simultaneously while that was going on, they were rerouting the 880 freeway after the earthquake fell in 1989. And that was another inroad to talk about health to the West Oakland community based on this car traffic and truck traffic. And I had being orientated from these public health individuals who came in and saw that this was a potential campaign for West Oakland. It sparked a lot of ideas of how individuals could overcome these impacts and burdens. And that's how I got started. And the next thing I know, there was funding to establish a community-based organization called the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. And the Pacific Institute, along with one of their members or affiliates named Alan Edson, got a small grant to pull residents together to start the conversation about environmental justice. And I tell people I went to a meeting and I didn't leave in 2000 and 1994. I went to a meeting, and I didn't leave until 2025.
Yes, ma'am. Well, we're grateful for that. And in between that time, there was a lot going on with the West Oakland
Oh, there's been a
Environmental
lot.
Indicators
That's a lot.
Project. Yes.
It's been a lot. It's been. I mean, I could not imagine. I could not imagine. I'm just gonna say, could not imagine all the things that I have learned. I've been engaged and participated from 1994 to 2025. I've been to the White House and everything in between those um, agencies, academia, uh, businesses, uh, terminal operators, uh, labor, community to learn what it takes to reduce these impacts to a community. I had no idea that I would have that. I would be able to establish that capacity to be able to speak and translate what my community was suffering from, or West Oakland was suffering from, and our kids were suffering from, based on what was being placed and making space in this community of West Oakland.
So tell me how have you been able to inspire the young people who are really going to have to deal with the climate emergency both locally, nationally, and globally? But I see them. They're inspired by you. How have you been able to inspire them?
And I went to cooking school at Laney.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I love to cook, and they like the food, and one of the things that cost of my education, my deliberate education about being engaged seems to resonate with a lot of young people.
Mhm.
I try to keep it at their level of understanding and transitioning and translating the most technical information that bureaucracy don't want to take time to give them. And that has been very supportive of them. And also at the same time, talking about my lived experience and the reality of doing this work. So that's how I've been able to attract the youth that I brought to the Mothers of the Movement event. Because it, it's not mine to keep, it's mine to share
Yes.
what I've done so they can take it on to their next generation, their networks. It's not mine to keep. So I've been blessed to be able to be supportive in that era with uh, the young people.
So, how can you speak to how environmental racism shows up in West Oakland, both from a historical perspective and currently?
It shows up on multiple levels of government, locally, special districts, statewide, federal wide. It shows up. Us, the accessibility to where things are placed in the spaces of West Oakland for the last 80 years has contributed to this community not have the same equity as other neighborhoods from Temescal or from Emeryville to the hills to San Alejandro and back around. It's not the same equity of how industry is able to, through zoning, through land use, proximity, and enforcement, able to establish certain industry businesses in particular neighborhoods. And that is part of the racism. And that has been 40 to 50 years for them to recognize because of redlining, the history of redlining has been surfaced that people start connecting these dots.
Mm-hmm.
And people not understanding redlining came about because of some rich people having land to dictate how that land is going to be used. Then simultaneously, they decided to develop bureaucracy and codes and zoning and land use and who gets to live where. So the history of this racism goes back to the 20s and the 30s. And it's not about just West Oakland. It is a phenomenon across the United States where things are placed, such as freeways, warehousing, refineries, uh, uh, bridges, all those type of infrastructure needs are being placed in what community? Through the mechanisms of them designing and one of the planning engineers and scientists have supported that for the last 80 years of where things get placed. For the who, not the what, the who.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The Color of Law. If you have not, for my audience, if you have not read The Color of Law and you live in the Bay Area, you need to read The Color of Law. It's a great case study about how redlining and the things that Miss Margaret just shared with us have impacted where and how all of us live. Now, Miss Margaret, you've been on the front lines of accountability in West Oakland and nationally and across the state. But in particular, I want to talk about a little company called Schnitzer Steel that did change its name. But we know it's those of us who've been here, we know Schnitzer, right? For a long time. And there was a $4.1 million settlement in 2021 that I know you were very instrumental in. You were involved in that case. Can you share with us, with my audience, some of the battles that you have fought around that particular manufacturer in West Oakland over the years?
Okay. The battle has been about operation and administration and the bureaucracy between the government agencies, state, local, and county jurisdiction to make them have the abilities not to burden a certain area of the community. And that certain area is in West Oakland. But the first thing I want the audience to understand, the land that the metal shredder is on is private land, even though it's on the shoreline next door to the port. I was there. You were the first to be your predecessor to actually come into West Oakland and say, I'm going to do something with this company called Schnitzer Steel. They are totally out of compliance and they are violated to the health and safety of this community. You invited me to your press conference. Yes. You were the first in my 30 years of doing this work I was ever invited by the county DA office to come and speak about our problems, our burden, our disproportionately impacted anything in relationship to this business called metal shredding. And I always will remember that.
Yes, ma'am. So tell us, how has the metal shredding, that business that you said that they got grandfathered in on this private land, how have they managed to just continue to pollute the community? Tell us about the state. Where are the state regulators in the county? What's happening?
They have money to put in politicians' office to be reelected. They have money to put in the legislative lobbyist pockets to speak for them. They have that ability to write a check. And also, they have the business of pick and pull, not just locally, but nationally. And it may have pick and pull internationally. I haven't done the research or data, but having the scrap, having the junkyard ability as a methodology to scrap metal to send over to uh, China and whoever else to repurpose that metal to send back to us for cars, for the auto industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the last fire in 2023, it was not about just West Oakland. It went all the way down to Castro Valley, all the way into Berkeley, to Albany. Got that smoke.
That's right. And I know from the grand jury investigation and the indictment, well, the investigation of my lawyers and the indictment, that there was lead. The Bay Area Quality Management District found lead in that plume that went all over far across the bay. And so, the criminal grand jury indictment was a critical step in holding them accountable and certainly pushing back against some of the most powerful interests that we know, as you point out, that they have for decades been able to pay people to be on their team and be their champion. And so tell my audience what your reaction was when the new district attorney dismissed the case against Radius Reliance from the fire.
I was so disappointed. I'm disappointed. My heartburn was about she did not, she nor her staff had the decency to communicate. Just the email, snail mail, or pigeon like to say, I'm getting ready to do this. That was my first heartburn. Because we had spent 2 years from 2023 to up to 2025 being in this rapid response task force with California Cal EPA and US EPA trying to find resolution. And at that time, when under your care, you had your attorneys being at the upfront and in the center of trying to find out how to support. I was just shocked and amazed that the new DA, she was just like kind of clueless. Mm-hmm. She just did not see the value of connecting with us in West Oakland, that she was going to make this decision.
Right, right. It's my understanding she did not talk to the victims who testified at the criminal grand jury or the firefighters. I remember being very disturbed, by the testimony and the recollections of the firefighters, how terrifying it was for them being out there trying to fight that fire and not knowing what they were up against, and then it did. The fire just had a devastating impact across the bay. And so certainly we were prepared to hold them accountable. And it's a very, very disappointing situation where corporate crimes just go unaddressed, right? That's been the history of justice in this country, is that we over-criminalize the little people, but the big corporate people, nobody wants to hold them accountable. And that the harm that Schnitzer is doing is devastating to all of us.
And it'd been different if our state attorney office had already slapped them around, but lack of a better word, has slapped them around and made them pay $4 million as restitution, right, to West Oakland. That would have been different. But I seems that somebody didn't connect the dots
Yeah.
and relationship to understand about environmental justice, public health, and emission reduction planning. That to me was more heart, the bigger heartache
Right.
from that DA's office that nobody seems to have just common sense. Common sense. Connect that to those who are most involved.
Yeah. Right. Of course.
That is a value. I feel that was so disrespectful that you just see that was a value to have that sense of communication.
Yes, ma'am. And I know that my lawyers were in touch with you and were definitely following what you were doing. And I know that the attorney general was also their office came and was very supportive of that prosecution. That they came to court with my lawyers and they were fighting alongside us with the court, trying to ensure that the case went forward. And so I'm not sure who dropped the ball or why that ball was dropped, other than, as you say, there was no connection or concern. They didn't connect the dots and made a very drastic decision without doing their due diligence, basically. And we all are going to suffer for that.
That the power of communication can reduce combativeness, conflict, distension, in a lot of different ways. And if those who in the place of power don't see there is a relationship for them and us, we and us, how are we going to be able to sit at a table and have racial equity to do anything? And how are we going to make it that everybody have a certain level of, because you live in the flatlands, why can't you have clean air the same way that the people in Piedmont, uh, Walnut Creek, Lafayette gets to have? Why do we have to have with this industry in our neighborhood that's supposed to provide jobs and certain equities to us? Why is that we got this government agency that don't see this connection? Why are they resisting? Why are you resisting to communicate with us? That's all I was asking for, some form of communication. I have called her office, and it was just like, I don't need to talk to you.
Wow.
I've called her office a couple times. I've talked to a couple staff. It was just like, I don't have to communicate with you. I don't need to know your story. I have my priorities. That is what government is missing. That's why that's how you stop making people be pissed off at you.
Yep. You be a public servant and you be part of this community.
Don't talk about public servant and you ain't walked through the steps to do that.
That's right. Yes, ma'am. That's absolutely right. All right, Miss Margaret. Well, thank you so much. We're going to bring this to a close. Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate your wisdom.
And thank you for appreciating me.
Of course. We learn from you. We follow in your footsteps, as I said on Saturday, your resilience, your courage, your perseverance. The love that you have for this community is a legacy that we all want to carry forward, and your courage. Thank you so much. DEA, FBI, DHS, DOJ, ICPB. These agencies have often violated the constitutional rights of American citizens. Coercive searches are commonplace in our society. In Trump's America, however, the government is requiring them to interfere with people's constitutional rights as a matter of course with daily quotas. What is this Alien Enemies Act? Never heard of it? Don't feel bad. Most of us have no idea what this is. It's a law that was passed in 1798 when Congress thought we were going to war with France. It was the Patriot Act of their time. The Alien Enemies Act has only been used 3 times in the 226 years since it was passed. During the War of 1812, we all remember that, and in World War I and World War II. This is the law that was used in World War II to justify the internment of 120,000 people of Japanese descent, including those who were born in the USA. President Franklin Roosevelt signed an Executive Order 9066, to invoke the Alien Enemies Act and provide for the incarceration of anyone of Japanese descent. Folks were rounded up, just like in Nazi Germany, and sent to concentration camps. The government created military zones in California, Washington, and Oregon, and prison camps were set up in Montana, New Mexico, and North Dakota. The enforcement agencies included the FBI and military troops on American soil. Within 4 months, they were able to incarcerate about 117,000 people of Japanese descent. Anyone with 1/16 blood of Japanese was arrested and incarcerated. For 3 years, from 1942 to 1945, the U.S. government incarcerated Japanese Americans without any type of due process based solely on their national origin. The Japanese internment is considered historically one of the most brutal violations of American civil rights in the 20th century. Given what we know about how badly that turned out, it's shocking that Trump would dust off that law and bring it back. But here we are. On March 15th, 2025, Donald Trump signed an executive order making the Alien Enemies Act apply to a Venezuelan gang that he declared was an invading force. According to Trump's view of his executive order, anyone associated with this gang can be immediately deported without constitutional due process required under the Fifth Amendment of our Constitution. Given the quota system, it basically means anyone from Venezuela can be deported. Anyone that looks like they might be from Venezuela can be deported. Not to Venezuela, though, but to El Salvador. Venezuela is not cooperating. They're not taking people in that Trump calls alien enemies. So Trump needed a place where they could go. And he cut a deal with a South American dictator named Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador.
President Trump, thank you so much. How many illegal criminals are you planning on exporting to El Salvador? And President Bukele, how many are you willing to take from the U.S.?
As many as possible. And I just asked the president, it's this massive complex that he built, jail complex. I said, can you build some more of them, please?
Bukele is now the proud warden of Trump's illegal deportations at a cost of $6 million in American money. He and Trump have even publicly joked about upping the ante to build some prisons in El Salvador for Americans. In May, the United States Supreme Court took up a challenge to Trump's alien enemies executive order. The Supreme Court decided that district courts must respond to emergency requests wherever illegal removal is threatened in the absence of court action.
In the 7-2 decision, the justices saying notice roughly 24 hours before removal, devoid of information about how to exercise due process rights to contest that removal, surely does not pass muster.
Some of Trump's MAGA judges are butthurt that they might have to work overtime or work extra fast to deal with emergency requests. But the Supreme Court pointed out that the purpose of a preliminary injunction has always been to try to preserve the relative positions of the parties. In other words, to keep everything in place while the case is being decided. In making its decision, the Supreme Court essentially blocked Trump from deporting anyone else without due process. In a pair of decisions, the court said that any person who could potentially be deported under Trump's executive order is entitled to due process, at least notice in time to request a hearing before they are actually deported. The case is called AARP versus Trump, but it's not that AARP that some of us know. The American Association of Retired Persons had to issue a statement telling folks, hey, it's not us, and even went to court to get the name of the case changed. Who is an alien enemy? According to the law, the meaning of an alien enemy is supposed to be a person owing allegiance to an enemy state. In 1942, when FDR signed Executive Order 9066, it was presumed that anyone with 1/16 of Japanese blood owed allegiance to Japan. That's how racist we were. The law is supposed to be about a war between two countries or an invasion of the United States by a foreign nation or government. And it's important to remember that only Congress can declare war against another country, not the president. But in true Trumpian fashion, Trump is ignoring the actual language of the law and trying to redefine the meaning of the act by declaring that a gang in a foreign country has invaded the United States and is conducting irregular warfare against us. So far, he has been laughed out of court in almost every court that has heard this ridiculous assertion. With one exception, the federal district courts have ruled that there is no war with the gang, no invasion, and no predatory incursion. But Trump does not respect the rule of law, and he could care less if his executive orders are unhinged and unconstitutional. And as long as he is in charge of the government, the FBI, the DHS, the DOJ, the DEA, and ICE will be suiting up to enforce his orders. On June 4th, 2025, a district court weighed in on Trump and his minions in a case called JGG versus Donald J. Trump. It is the latest decision in this crazy constitutional crisis. In JGG, relying on Trump's unconstitutional executive order, the Department of Homeland Security flew several hundred Venezuelan people from detention in the United States to a Salvadoran prison known as the Center for Terrorism Confinement. This prison is well known for human rights abuses and inhumane conditions, and is ran by one Nayib Bukele. The planes took off while the court was hearing arguments on the case, and after the court had already issued an order telling the government not to remove the men from the United States. When the judge learned that the folks were possibly on the planes already, he made a second order to stop and told the government's lawyers to ensure that his orders were complied with immediately. Trump's minions ignored the orders. The case is now whether Trump and our government should be held in contempt for violating the Constitution and multiple court orders when they literally flew plane loads of several hundred people from here to El Salvador. It sounds like a movie, doesn't it? But it's really happening. It's reality in America now. The JGG judge is clear that the Constitution was violated. He said, perhaps the president lawfully invoked the Alien Enemies Act. Perhaps, moreover, defendants are correct that plaintiffs are gang members. But, and this is the critical point, there is simply no way to know for sure, as the CCOT plaintiffs never had any opportunity to challenge the government's say-so. Defendants instead spirited away plane loads of people before any such challenge could be made. And now, significant evidence has come to light indicating that many of those currently entombed in CCOT have no connection to the gang and thus languish in a foreign prison on flimsy, even frivolous accusations. This past week, the Trump administration's immigration crackdown escalated in a way that felt more like a military operation than a law enforcement raid. In San Diego, an ICE raid in a quiet neighborhood ended in chaos and in resistance. ICE agents armed with assault rifles stormed a neighborhood restaurant near homes and schools looking for undocumented immigrants. But this wasn't a quiet arrest. It was a full-blown tactical assault. Agents arrived in unmarked vehicles, dressed in riot gear, face masks, and carrying long guns, like they were headed into a war zone. And then, as residents and bystanders began to gather in protest and ask questions, flashbang grenades were launched into the street.
Protesters confronting ICE agents after a surprise raid on a popular Italian restaurant in San Diego. Agents setting off what appeared to be flashbang grenades to disperse crowds around their vehicle.
Let's be clear. Flashbangs are designed to disorient, to frighten, and to send a message. Stay silent. Stay scared. This wasn't just an immigration raid. It was an act of intimidation, a show of force in a working-class neighborhood in broad daylight, targeting people who were just trying to live their lives. But the community didn't stay silent. They showed up. Neighbors poured into the street, yelling shame and demanding answers. Some tried to block ICE vehicles. Others recorded the whole thing on their phones. What happened wasn't just witnessed, it was challenged. This is what state-sanctioned violence looks like in Trump's America under Trump's immigration agenda. Not just arrest, but militarized raids and confrontations in front of families and children. Not just deportations, but trauma that ripples through the entire neighborhood. The message from the administration is loud and clear. No space is safe. Not your job, not your neighborhood, not your home, not even the street you grew up on. It's important to remember, this isn't happening in isolation. It's happening across the country. It's part of a broader campaign to criminalize and intimidate immigrants, to break community ties, and to make people afraid to speak up or to seek help. But San Diego pushed back. Residents stood their ground, even as flashbangs exploded at their feet. Here is the city's response.
The scenes that we saw play out on the streets were absolutely unacceptable. Why were ICE agents armed to the teeth as if they were entering a war zone, storming restaurants? Why were ICE agents aggressively shoving people against the walls and handcuffing every worker in sight? In fact, interestingly, as you read the warrant says that they were going to arrest everyone, detain everyone in there, all the employees.
The people are sending a message too. We are watching, we are organizing, and we are not backing down. What happened in San Diego is a turning point. It's not just about what ICE did. It's about how communities respond when power comes crashing through the front door. It's about what kind of country we are and what kind of future we're building and how we're going to protect each other in Trump's America. Because when government agents treat immigrant neighborhoods like enemy territory, it's on all of us to say, not in our name. This isn't just about immigrants. This is about justice. This is about dignity. And this is about fighting for the soul of this country, one neighborhood at a time. Thanks for tuning in to Pamela Price Unfiltered. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel to watch the show and to my Substack to read the weekly word. Your support keeps the conversation raw and unfiltered. And you can listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts.